my question for you would be, what is the thing that you know you should be doing for your podcast/business, but you keep making excuses for, even though you know how important it is? That would be my question. Podcast Growth Nation, welcome back to another episode of Podcast Growth University, where we talk all things podcasting all of the time. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode. I have to adjust here. So if you're watching this on YouTube, obviously you can see I'm not in the studio. If you're listening to this, I don't know if you'll recognize a difference, but I'm also using my old mic because traveling with the mixer and all that can be a pain in the butt. So last week, for episode number 103, a unique way to get more listens and exposure to a new audience, we talked about having on members of your community to your podcasts, creating content based on them being on, and then the potential of them sharing that to their audience with the understanding that their audience might be similar to your audience. So today, for episode number 104, it's really time to start treating your podcast like a business. I've done this episode in the past, and there's a reason I'm doing this episode again. And the reason is I have seen so many podcasts die in the last, let's say, 2 years, right? So theoretically, 104 episodes is 2 years. 52 plus 52 is 104. Over the last 2 years, I have seen so many podcasts die. And one of the big reasons is because people are not treating their podcasts like a business. And all that means is they're not making decisions. I think this is probably the best way to put it. There's a lot more necessity when you start a business to figure things out, because if you don't make money by X date, you don't get to do the business anymore because the business ultimately dies. With podcasting, we have to figure out how much time, energy, effort, focus, or money are you spending on a monthly basis to make this thing go, and then how long before that runway runs out. So when I left my job in 2018, I think I had like $10,000 in the bank. We didn't have a team, right? So that money wasn't going to editing or social media stuff or whatever it is. So that $10,000 in the business could have lasted me a pretty good amount of time. It didn't, because I spent money like an idiot. But if I could go back and do it differently, I might have a new perspective. But that's what I really want to land in today's episode. Most people, I'm guessing most people that listen to this podcast started a podcast from a place of heart. And I'm the same way, 1,000,000%. I respect that. I love that. I love that about you. And I'm guessing when I start facilitating more of a community experience, that's something we'll start to see. But also, if it's not financially sustainable, it's not sustainable. The reason I'm doing this podcast remote from a place outside of my home and my studio is because I'm in Toronto right now. I got invited up to do a speech about the importance of asking powerful questions and how to pull powerful content out of yourself, what questions to ask yourself to get some really powerful content, in Toronto with Evan Carmichael. So Evan Carmichael has a mastermind, and tomorrow, so after this episode drops, I'll be doing that speech. And something we talked about today was YouTube and how a lot of people aren't really understanding that they're never going to make money with their current strategy, or they are going to run out of money long before they make money. They're going to run out of money long before they make enough money to sustain what they're currently doing. Here's the hard part. I don't know what treating your podcast like a business looks like, specifically depending on where you are. It might mean hiring someone or outsourcing something. It might mean doing stuff that you don't like. Oh, you don't like social media? Okay, well, if you didn't like social media and you had a coffee shop, you'd still have to do social media. Okay, what can we do about that? It might mean starting a Facebook group. It might mean starting an email list. It might mean getting on YouTube. the interesting thing about treating anything like a business is it forces you to do things that you wouldn't normally do because the necessity is so high. But that was really a conversation that we were having today around YouTube specifically, but it crosses over to podcasts. A lot of people aren't going to survive long enough to make money. The podcast game, the YouTube game, the content creator game, for most of us, it's just a survival game. Why do I get to talk about podcasting? I've just survived long enough to get to the point where I've learned a lot of stuff, and some people look at me and think I have, quote unquote, some level of success. But if 6 months in, we ran out of money, this podcast wouldn't exist. You wouldn't be listening to me. I wouldn't have the other podcasts. We wouldn't have the community. None of this would even be real. It really is a game of survival. But business is a game of survival too. I don't know what the advice is in this episode. I don't know. I don't know what the tactic is, other than whatever you've been putting off that you know you should be doing. It's time to lean into that a little bit more. Had a wonderful conversation today with a gentleman, and he was talking about how he hasn't really monetized. Him and his wife have a podcast. They have a YouTube channel, and they did have a podcast, but they're not doing it anymore. And I said, well, this is the same thing. It's the same thought. He said, well, we haven't monetized yet. We make money on YouTube. We make a couple grand a month, $2 or $3 grand a month, but we haven't monetized with anything else. And I said, well, is that $2 or $3 grand a month sustainable? And he said, it's good money, but it's not really going to boost us to the next level. So we had that conversation today, and he said these exact words. He says, I know it's time for me to start treating this more like a business, because it is. Now, maybe the tactic is working through your relationship with money because you have a money block and you don't feel deserving of it. Maybe treating it like a business is starting to look at your analytics every day. Maybe treating it like a business is learning about business in general, going on YouTube and looking up business fundamentals. Maybe it's spending more time doing specific things. So maybe it's more time planning out products or more time planning out monetization strategies or whatever it may be. It's just harder than it's ever been. And I don't want you to end up being the statistic of, I used to have a podcast and now I don't anymore. Because that statistic is very, very big. I think it's like 5 million podcasts, 4 to 5 million podcasts have been created. There's only like 400,000 currently in production. So if you think about that, that's only what? 10%? Right? Maybe 10% of podcasts that have been created are still in production right now, producing episodes on a weekly or monthly basis. That number is going to continue to change because some podcasts will die and then some podcasts will come in. But that's one of the reasons why the life cycle of a podcast can be very, very short, because when you start, you're starting from a place of heart. And I love that. I absolutely love that. I have so much admiration for that because that's what I did. But eventually it gets to the point where you're saying, and I've heard this a million times, I'm sinking 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 1,000, whatever the number is, dollars per month into this, but I'm not getting anything in return, and it's just not sustainable. So this is a gentle, soft kick in the butt to do that thing that you've been putting off, to make that product, to make that freebie, to get the Facebook group launched, to start offering coaching, to change up something that you said you'd change up if it didn't work, to reach out to that big guest, to do the thing that scares you. It's probably that. It's probably do the thing that scares you, because having a business is a really good way to have the necessity to do the stuff that scares you. But sometimes it doesn't feel that way when you have a podcast or a YouTube channel, because you're not taking it as seriously as you should. And again, I'm guilty of this. In the beginning, when I started, we would record an episode and then I might have a coaching call and then that would be it. That would be it for me in the day. I wouldn't do anything after that. That was it. I could have definitely taken it way more seriously. And then I ended up very broke and I had to take it seriously. I just don't want you to get to that place, because the truth of the matter is most people would have quit when we were as broke as we were because it was the logical thing to do. The logical thing to do wasn't pour more money into the podcast and more effort. Is that why we've gotten to where we are? Yeah, obviously that's a big piece of it. But that was very much the understanding of, I got a lot of this from Alan. We're probably going to lose for the first couple of years. That's just par for the course. We're most likely going to lose because that's what happens in business.
Hi, my name's John Laredo, and I just wanted to give a big shout out to Kevin Palmieri. I had reached out to him. He had been referred to me when I had shared with a friend of mine some interest in doing a podcast, and he said, you've got to use Kevin. He's fantastic. He's the best around. He'll get you started and off the ground and soaring high. Kevin was phenomenal in terms of leading me through the whole process, and not just easy to work with, but really, really knows his stuff. So whether you're looking for somebody to help you and get you started, or somebody, as I've done, where I'm putting it entirely in his hands because I've got total trust and confidence in him, any of those ends of the spectrum, you're going to have a lot of success and a lot of fun working with Kevin. Trust me. Thanks.
Somebody in the mastermind today said this. They said, yeah, I didn't make any money for the first 2 years. What was their business? Commercial carpet cleaner or something in the late 80s. And they said, I didn't make any money for the first 2 years. And the first 2 years were absolutely brutal. It makes sense. There was a stat that Podmatch came out with in their report. I think they do like monthly reports. And it said something along the lines of, don't expect anything to happen for 2 years or 100 episodes. And honestly, I would say that's pretty accurate, especially now, because the landscape of podcasting has changed. So again, I'm not trying to dissuade you from doing anything. I'm not trying to scare you. All I'm trying to share is the awareness that one of the reasons most podcasts fail is because they die before they make enough money to make it worth it, whatever worth it means. But so this is the last thing that I'll add to this. This will be a shorter episode. Say it every time. It still ends up being 20 minutes, so we'll see. But maybe for you, treating your podcast like a business is you focusing on building demand. A lot of people have really good ideas of, this is going to be my coaching practice, and this is going to be my course thing, and this is going to be my membership, and that's awesome, and those are great ideas. But those ideas do not succeed without demand. And maybe right now, it's your focus to build demand. Again, you've heard many times we talk about supply and demand and how that all will play into this. A very simple concept, but I think we can complicate it, and we can kid ourselves into thinking that when we have the product, the people will come. Some of us, that is true. I think the vast majority of us, it is not true, unfortunately. So maybe that's the thing for you. This would be my question. My question for you would be, what is the thing that you know you should be doing for your podcast / business, but you keep making excuses for, even though you know how important it is? That would be my question that I would leave you with. A challenging question to answer, for sure. Very, very challenging. But sometimes we have to ask ourselves that. And that's the wonderful thing about being in a mastermind and not just speaking, but I get to sit in and learn. I'm learning so much that it's easy to get comfortable with what you're doing. Like, okay, this is how we do it. We do this and this and this. And then you get exposed to a bunch of new ideas and you say, interesting. What if we tried doing that? What if we started doing that? What if we did it in this way? What if we stopped doing it that way? And that it really is you treating it more like a business, right? Me having a community and a Facebook group and all of that stuff for this podcast is me treating it more like a business. Right now, I'm not putting the amount of effort in. This is a fine line because I don't expect a ton of results out right now, which is why I'm not super quick to do certain things. But it would be very different if this was the first podcast I started, and if I didn't make any money with this podcast, I wouldn't be able to do it anymore. It's different. And that's a whole nother can of worms why you can only listen to certain things from certain people. Because if I was a bazillionaire in a different industry and then I started a podcast, I can lose money for years because it doesn't really matter that much. Having money is it's different. You can get certain guests on, you can have a nice studio, you can pay for boosted posts and sponsors and all that stuff. You can pay for all that stuff. That's not how most of us are going to do that. Most of us are going to have to take this podcast, your podcast, use that as an opportunity to create some level of demand, some level of community, some level of value, obviously. And then that's going to become where people get to know you, like you, trust you. And from there, a very, 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 very small percentage of them will move to the next layer, which is maybe a Facebook group. And then a very small percentage of them will move to the next layer, which might be an email list. And eventually, the smallest percentage of people, just because that's the way it works, will exchange money with you in some way, shape, or form. Last thing. All right, here we are. We're at, 17 minutes or something. Last thing. Be very careful about self-sustaining versus train hopping. All I mean by that is relying on others, so ads, sponsorships, affiliates, podcast groups, whatever it is, versus creating your own thing. There was a very impactful thing that happened today where one of the people in the mastermind who was teaching has a YouTube channel with 2 million subscribers. And it's a channel for kids. It's about toys. And they were making, I think he said like $30,000 to $50,000 a month from ads, from YouTube AdSense. Like YouTube was paying them. And then something came out where, I don't remember the name of it, but it was like YouTube and Google did something for children's content where, so if you upload to YouTube, you've probably seen where it says this is made for kids, this is not made for kids, whatever it is. YouTube made a lot of changes and it ended up cutting this person's income by like 90%. So the thing that they had as a monetized solution went away entirely. Now, luckily, they had other things going on, but I just don't want that to happen to you. I don't want you to say, well, eventually they'll start paying creators more. Yeah, they probably will, but it's going to take time. And that's going to start at the very top of creators and eventually work its way down to the podcasts that are just smaller and newer and have a smaller audience. Self-sustaining is I have a product, a service, I have practiced sales, I have whatever it is, an email list, whatever. That's self-sustaining. Train hopping is, well, I'll get a sponsor this month. I'll get a sponsor next month. I'll get affiliates. I'll do that. I'm not saying that's not worth your time. I think that's probably more supplemental than anything. I go to the gym. I love bodybuilding. Creatine is one of the most researched supplements and most beneficial supplements on the planet. But if you don't go to the gym, taking creatine is not going to do a lot for you. It's a supplement. I think of the train hopping type of stuff, supplemental. Yes, certain people make a boatload of money from that. Yes. But again, that's the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, right? That's just not how most people are going to make their money. And I just don't want you to chase that and then succeed at that and then realize, well, this isn't really what I thought it was. So, end rant. Also, just completely off topic, it's very interesting how in different places you feel different recording. I feel very on, like very flowy, like I'm hitting flow in this location, which is weird because I've never recorded here. It's completely new to me. I don't have any resemblance of a setup. I have my camera on a tripod. I have this mic. I'm still not entirely sure if my mic is plugged in. My mic is on. It says off, but it says it's picking it up. So who knows? This whole episode might be garbage. But it's interesting how a different place and a different energy is a different level of focus. So maybe you've experienced that if you've done a lot of traveling for your podcast. Okay, if you feel stuck, if you feel uncertain, if you're not sure where to go next, and you need some sort of breakthrough, I have my link for a 30-minute podcast breakthrough session in the show notes below. Next week, we are going to talk about, So next week, we're going to talk about the fact that I asked our other Facebook group, Next Level Nation, how the members found the podcast. And what I'll do is I'm going to look at the most common answers, and then we'll talk about that. We asked our audience how they found us, and we got some really, really, really good feedback. Is it worth going on other podcasts? We'll find out. Is it worth doing calls to action from the podcast? We'll find out. That's really what we're going to go through next week. Also, last thing, I did an 1.5-hour interview with Evan Carmichael, and it was all about YouTube. It was about YouTube being a content creator, really those two things, because I wanted to make sure it was valuable even if you're not on YouTube yet. I don't know how I'm going to release that yet. I don't know if it's going to be an 1.5-hour episode. I don't know if it's going to be 3:30s, 2:45s. I don't know yet. I might drop it as a bonus episode and just do 2 episodes that week. I'm not sure, but I just want to make you aware that when you see it, it might be out of the realm of normalcy. But yeah, I'm curious to any and all feedback on that. All right. I hope you're not missing and you're staying consistent regardless of travel. I hope that if and when a guest pulls out, you just hammer off a solo episode to the best of your ability. I hope you're not using imperfection as a cloak for uncertainty. And I hope most of all, I hope you're enjoying the process. Until next week, keep on crushing it, keep on podcasting, and I will talk to you then.